Welcome back to Let's Make a Game, a channel about making computer role-playing games using the free program Twine and the Sugarcube format for Twine. In this video, I would like to show you how to use drop-down menus in Twine. This is another way to get input. From the player or the user. We've talked about text boxes already. We've talked about number boxes. We've talked about, of course, we've talked about links and buttons, and we've talked about radio buttons, which is where you have those circular buttons next to different options and you click into one of them. But this is a new one. So here we are playing the role of an explorer who is trying to attract the services of a guide, and we have a series of options as to how much we're going to offer, starting at £10 at the lowest and then going up to 100, and we can pick any of those and then we press continue and the game continues, or at least it will once I program it. Or we could just say, yep, £50 sounds right, and continue, and that would be fine. It would take it as that 50. So that's what it does. Let's look at the code that allows that to happen. So as usual, the first thing we do is we go to Story, and we go to Details, we choose Sugarcube, and then we go to JavaScript. We make sure that this code is in the JavaScript. config.passages.nobr equals true. That code stops the program interpreting every line break as meaning that they should put a line break on the screen, and that allows us to lay out the code nicely. Otherwise we'd have to sort of squish it all up and it would be very hard, quite a lot harder to follow. So there's three pages in this, but really this is the main one. This one's just to have somewhere for the button to take the player to. For now, of course, there'll be more code in this in future videos because this is an actual project that I'm going to start. This isn't just an example. I'm actually starting a new project, but I'll talk about that more in videos to come. And we have the initialize. Again, this stuff will be relevant, but it's not relevant today. The only thing we need to look at today is that $O is the amount of money that we're offering, and $Z and $Y are the temporary variables as usual. So most of the action takes place on this screen, which looks quite complicated, but I'll show you that it isn't as complicated as it looks. So we have the text here with a couple of line breaks that just explains what you're being asked to put in. And you'll notice that this is one of those cases where we have a variable and we are adding all this different text to that variable, and the text that we're adding is code, and then once we've done that, we then print the variable, and that executes the code. And of course the question when we do that is, well, why don't we just type the code in straight away? And the answer is because when we type the code in straight away, it doesn't quite, the program has a bit of trouble sort of matching it up. This sometimes happens when you have for loops. It has a bit of trouble connecting this beginning list box to the end of the list box and recognizing that it's all part of the same command. Whereas if you sort of present it to the computer all at once by putting it in a variable and printing the variable at the end, that seems to make it more understandable to the computer. So it just sort of has to be done this way. But anyway, let's go through and I'll show you what we're entering into this Y variable. So the first thing is we have this line here is just telling the program to to put this text into the variable $y. And the reason this looks slightly different to this is because of these diagonal slashes. We need to do that because by default, a quote mark indicates the end of the string. We have this quote, or the beginning or the end of a string. So we have this quote mark that's the beginning, and going along here, normally we'd have a quote mark here, but the computer would say, oh, a quote mark, I know what that is, that means the end of the string. Well, we don't want it to be the end of the string, we want that to be part of the string, to be treated as a character in the string, like every other. So we put this slash next to it, the top left to bottom right diagonal slash, and that tells the computer, don't treat this quote as being the end of the string, treat it as being part of the string. And that's why we need to do that. So we have this bit of code. Then we have this for loop, and the for loop starts at 10, goes up to 100, and goes up by 5 each time. That's a bit unusual. Normally when we have a for loop, the last thing you'd have would be plus plus, or $z plus plus, or $y or $x, whatever it was, meaning that it goes up by 1. But in this case, I thought it was a bit excessive to have every single number from 10 to 100. And if we were going to have that, we might as well just have a number box and let the player type it in rather than choosing from a list. So we go up by increments of 5, and we do this, which is we add to y, and I'll type out what the text would look like without the slashes. So it's option, quote, £10. So it'll be something like that. It'll be less than, option, O-P-T-I-O-N, space, quote, £10, quote, space, and then the number 10, and then greater than. And of course, it will do a similar thing with each run through of the for loop. So then it will add £15, and then it will add £20, etc., up to 100. The only extra bit of code here is that when z is equal to 50, before we add this part, before we add the greater than sign, we add this word selected, S-E-L-E-C-T-E-D, after a space there. So the option for 50 will look like this. And then the rest will just be in this same format up to 100. And then finally, when we've gone through the for loop, we have this code. Less than slash listbox, meaning the end of this is the end of the list box. There's no more options. And then we have a couple of this less than, br, greater than command, which is how we put line breaks in there. And then, having done all that, we print $y, and then we have a button which allows us to move on to the page result. Now, so we'll have a list of, I'll sort of isolate it so we can look at it. So we'll have code that's like this. Now, in reality, it'd actually be more like this, because we won't have, it's not putting in line breaks, but as you can see, that's quite difficult to follow what's happening. So the line, I've put the line breaks in just to make it easier for us to follow, but because the computer doesn't need line breaks, we don't bother putting that in when we're creating Y. So what do these commands mean? Well, this one just means this is the start of a drop-down menu, and the variable that we're allowing the user to select is $O. It has to be in quotes, even though it's a variable. And then we have a series of options, and there's two parts to this option, apart from just the word option. So we have less than option, then we have the text that is displayed, which in this case is £10 or £15 or whatever it may be, and then we have the value that will be put in $O if the user selects that option. So in some cases, the text that the user gets and the value that's put in the variable might be the same, and in that case, we wouldn't need to have two separate things. So, for example, we might have option. These are just different names of cities. We might have occasion to choose that, and if we wanted to display the name Sydney and also have the text Sydney put into the variable, then we don't need to have the text and the value as two separate things. But in this case, because we're displaying £10, but we just want the numeric value 10 put in O, and so the same for different numbers if they choose different numbers, we do need the two separate things. And the only complication is that the option for £50 has this word selected at the end of it. That just means start with 50 as the option that's selected. If you don't have to have anything with selected, you can't have more than one option that's selected, obviously, because you can't have two options chosen at the start. But you don't have to have any. You can have 0. And if you do have 0, it'll just start with the first option in the list chosen. But I wanted 50 selected because that's around the middle, and that seemed to make more sense to me to have that as the one that would come up at the start. And then at the end, we just have /listbox, which just tells the computer that this is the end of the drop-down menu and there will be no more options. And that is how you do a drop-down menu. It's not, in my experience, it's not an option that's the best option a lot of the time. Generally, I have found that either links or buttons or a text box or a number box is a better way, makes more sense to input as a way to allow the user to input data. But in this particular case, it was the best, I thought, and there will be other cases where it will be the best. So I hope that was useful or interesting to at least some of you, and I hope you will tune in next time.